And counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. Liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Roger, Tower.
Roger, we got a roll program.
Flight pilot, pleasure.
Reporting. Roger.
Get your program. Let's put Apollo 11 on a proper heading. Plus 30 seconds.
Flight line safety is nominal.
Roger, sir.
Roll complete and the pitch is programming.
Roger, roll, roger, pitch. Stand by for 1 Bravo. Mark, 1 Bravo.
1 Bravo.
1 Bravo is a...
Flight line safety is almost in the water.
Roger, sir.
altitude's 2 miles.
Okay. Roger, how you, Booster? We're going to flight 31 minutes, Captain.
Oh, 11 Houston, you're good at 1 minute.
So hello everybody and welcome back to another KSP video. I'm sure you've heard by the intro and obviously what the rocket looks like. We are doing a Apollo recreation video. My last video I loosely did an Apollo style mission, which is very different from a recreation. It's where the mission plan is somewhat similar in some elements to the Apollo missions. But this mission is basically exactly the Apollo missions. Of course, it's not exactly accurate. There are some things that I had to improvise. I was a little too close on fuel on the lander, so I had to dock with the upper stage, but minor things like that. So, we have launched the main first stage with the 5 F1 engines, or the Mastodon engines in KSP. And we have detached to the upper J2 engine stage, the I2, in KSP. This is a stage that will get us to an orbit of about 185 kilometers in real life, so we will be monitoring that in the game. So, for you guys wondering what I'm doing here, if you want to get into orbit, you don't just want to go up and then turn sideways, because obviously to get in orbit you want to, go sideways. You should ideally do a very shallow curve. You should go up and then start curving, and then the angle that you're curving at should go steeper and steeper and steeper. Kind of like if you took a parabola, and cut it in half. One side of that, if you kind of put it where it would look like a rocket, that should be your trajectory. So you should go up, and then at a gradually increasing steeper and steeper angle, you should go until you're eventually flat, because you want to go sideways. So we have circularized our orbit around Kerbin here, Earth in real life, and we are about to detach to our first stage, which has a single J2 engine. This is the stage which will carry out our trans-lunar injection burn, or I guess mooner injection burn, because we're in KSP. And that will get us to an encounter with the moon. Not an orbit or anything like that, just to get close enough to the moon where we can get into orbit by just pointing retrograde. So now normally getting an encounter with the moon is ridiculously easy. You can see I'm doing it right here. For people who've played KSP, I'm not shunning you for not playing anything, it's hard. But what Apollo did is they put on something called a return trajectory, meaning they got an encounter with the moon in such a way that if anything went wrong, if they went around the moon, because, they can't get into orbit, something went wrong, like Apollo 13, they would just get slingshot around the moon and taken right back to Earth. That is obviously a method of, fail-safing the mission. That's why Apollo 13, the people didn't die, was because of that. They were able to just go right back around to the Earth. Of course, there were other problems with CO2 and stuff. But that's why we're doing this, to model what the Apollo missions would have done. Now, of course, in the real Apollo missions, they would have had this planned out days in advance, but I don't. So I just kind of have to mess around with the maneuver node creator until I get a maneuver that is a return trajectory. If you are, playing KSP and you want to land to the moon, don't even do an Apollo style mission, and don't even do a return trajectory. It's just too much work. Kerbals, it's a video game. It's not like real life where if they die, it's a huge problem. So here we are executing our trans-mooner, or lunar, whatever you want to call it, injection burn. It's a pretty standard 700 meter per second burn to get to the moon. I had to split it up into 2 stages, but that's fine. That's not really what happened in real life. Again, I would have been able to use this whole stage, but again, minor things are different. It's the mission stays very, very similar to the real mission. So here we are separating our command module from our lunar module. I realized my Kerbals were in the lunar module, but whatever. Another thing I messed up is because my Kerbals were in the lunar module, I'm only bringing 2. Apollo actually had 3. So instead of 2 people landing on the moon, I'm going to only land 1 because I need somebody to stay in the command module. I'm sorry. That was just me messing up while I was setting up the mission. My bad. So here we are docking with the lunar modules. We can pull it off of the space tug or that upper stage here. So we're just going to activate that cheetah engine as it's called in the game, but obviously not called that in real life. So after we take this lunar lander out from this stage, we will finish our translunar injection burn since I didn't quite get to finish it with that stage. So to couple it real quick. And now we are free. So now I'm just going to create a maneuver node. Not quite there, but we're just going to create a maneuver node to kind of finish that translunar injection burn that I didn't quite get to finish with that main space tug stage. So there I am, just doing a little maneuver node to correct our course to get it on a nice return trajectory. There we go. And now we're just plotting the maneuver to get down to a low orbit around the Mun, about 40,000 meters. In real life, their orbit was 100,000 meters, but that was really close to the moon. Or, sorry, it was like 60,000 meters, but that was really close to the moon. Because, of course, in real life, the moon is way bigger than the Mun in KSP. In fact, I think the Earth in real life is like 20 times bigger than Kerbin. Because I know Kerbin's the size of Ceres, but I'm not quite sure what that compares to the Earth. So now we are going to do our... I forget what it's called, but the burn that gets us into a orbit around the moon. I can't quite remember what it's called in real life, but it's I think it's the low lunar orbit injection or something like that. Anyway, we're captured on the moon now. We're just going to equalize our orbit by burning retrograde at periapsis to lower that apoapsis down so our orbit is nice and circular. That way, when we dock, it's a lot easier because if your orbit's very elliptical, then you're going to have problems with speed differences because one's going to be going really fast and one's going to be going really slow. And that means that we'll have to use a lot of fuel to equalize our speed with the targets, which is not what we want. So that's why we get into a nice circular orbit when we are docking. And always, you should always get into a circular orbit because it's just easier to manage. So now we have Jebediah into the lunar lander, and we are undocking him from the command module so we can go down to the mooner in the game, or lunar surface, to see what's down there. And to beat those Soviets, of course. So now we're just plotting a retrograde burn to get us into a nice trajectory down towards the moon. So this thing has no SAS wheels, so I had to use RCS to point ourselves. Just execute that burn real quick. And now we are dropping down to the lunar surface. I'm going to stop talking here in a second because I have some audio of the actual landing that I will play while we are doing this. I will stop talking, sorry, when that happens, about now.
Forward. Forward. That's good. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. More forward. More forward, just into the right a little. 20 feet, down a half. 30 seconds. Forward, just a little bit. Good. Ready? Contact light.
So that was the real footage of the landing from Apollo 11. So now we are going to EVA, not Neil Armstrong, Jebediah Kerman, who is always better than Neil Armstrong. Forgot to extend the ladder there. So now we are just going to lower our Kerbinaut down to the surface so we can prove that those Soviets don't rule the world. Yeah, I kind of bonked that antenna and broke it, but it doesn't matter. I mean, do we really need the antenna? No. Just gonna plant the flag real quick to prove that the moon is ours. And we're just going to write something that is exactly similar. It's just what, Neil Armstrong said when he landed, or what you heard in the landing speech, but Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. That's because the area where they were landing is called the Sea of Tranquility. So if you ever looked at the moon before in real life, there's these really dark spots called seas, because ancient astronomers thought that they were actually seas, and the light spots, which I don't think they have a certain name. So the sea where they were landing was called the Sea of Tranquility. So when they landed, they called the lander Tranquility Base. But the lander itself was called the Eagle. On every single Apollo mission, the lander had a code name and the command module did. So in the case for Apollo 11, the lander was called the Eagle, obviously because America, bald eagle, and the command module was called Columbia. So now we're just walking back up the ladder and back onto the ascent stage so we can lift back up off of the moon. Just EVAing him and fiddling a little bit with the RCS jetpack, which they didn't have in real life, but the ladders here are messed up, so I had to use it to get him into the hatch and back on board our lunar lander. Now, in real life, the lander was two-stage. So there's a stage that landed, and then it would separate that little top bit and take off. I forgot to add this, though, so it is just a one-stage lander, but it gives you a resemblance of what the mission was like. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but all the other elements of the mission are very similar. So here we are. Oops. Forgot to cut that out. Now we are just pointing towards our, I don't know how to say this, but we are pointing sideways, that's what I meant to say, obviously to get into orbit, because of course rockets don't just go up, they have to go sideways to achieve orbit, because you have to get enough sideways velocity so you can balance your centrifugal force with the planet. Basically how orbits work is, if you ever, had a bucket or anything on the end of a string and you spin the thing around, you feel like the string's going to want to leave you, because that object, the centrifugal force is pushing it outwards. And that's how orbit works. When you go fast enough sideways, the force of you spinning around the object is exactly equal or more than gravity, so you just spin around it. It's like you are the bucket tied to the end of the string, and the planet is you pulling on the string. The bucket is trying to leave you. So now we're just playing around with the maneuver node creator to try to get a nice a nice close encounter between two crafts. So I have one here, just making sure that our separation is below about 1 kilometer. That's a pretty good metric you want to be aiming for. So now we are completing that maneuver node to get that intersection, because he plotted it in a maneuver node creator, but we have to actually execute the burn, obviously, to get that desired trajectory. So now we're just going to time warp around until we get... I have to finish the burn because it wasn't exactly correct, but little mid-course correction burn, you always have to have it just to get everything just right. Tiny 2 meter per second burn, nothing that's, going to take any fuel or anything. Just going to complete that real quick, get that separation nice and low. So now we're going to point retrograde relative to our target, because we want to zero out our velocity with the target. We and the target want to be moving at the same exact speed. Because if you aren't, then I'm just going to crash into it, basically. Or fly right by it, right? So that's, you can see that's happening right now. So to zero out our speed with the target, we can point towards the target, and then we can just point retrograde to zero our velocity again, point towards the target, burn again, and dock. So that's basically the procedure. I really hated how this lander was designed. How I designed it, unfortunately. It doesn't have SAS wheels, which I thought it had, but I guess it doesn't. It only has RCS. And the problem with that is that when one spacecraft moves one way, the other moves the opposite. So they just kind of go in this dance. So I had to zero out our speed and then turn off RCS on the other lander. RCS are these little puffs of smoke that you keep seeing. It's little control thrusters. So I can just point towards target and connect the two spacecraft very nicely. I don't know why this always happens to me, but every single time I dock on camera, it always happens on the dark side of the moon, which is obviously terrible because it looks terrible on camera. But I guess it's just unluckiness. I guess I'm just unlucky with that. So now that we have docked and brought Jebediah back into the command module, we are going to plot our return to Kerbin. You can now say bye-bye to the lunar lander, but it's still sticking around because, again, we zeroed out our speed. So we're moving at basically the same speed. The only speed we don't have is the speed of the docking clamps pushing each other apart. Bye-bye, lunar lander. So now we are completing our trans-Kerbin, I guess, trans-Kerbin injection burn. I'm not sure how you would phrase that. But this is the burn that will take us back to Kerbin. So we're just decoupling the command module, command pod, whatever you want. Yeah, command pod. Command pod from the rest of Columbia, the command module. We have that nice heat shield that is filled with a blader. It's just a heat-resistant pad, basically, so it can get up to thousands of degrees without our spacecraft melting. Because, again, our spacecraft is made out of aluminum and other materials like that would very easily melt under the heat of reentry. By the way, the reason why air gets hot during reentry is not because of friction that most people think. It's because of air compressing. Because as air compresses, it gets hot. Now we have landed, and the mission is over. Thanks for watching. Just a little side note before I quickly end the video. Again, little details here. Apollo 11 splashed down in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean instead of landing on a mountain. I couldn't really control this because what trajectory I picked when I did the trans-Kerbin injection burn was where I was going to end up. But I'd say that this mission is a pretty close approximation of what Apollo was like. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.